Hi, good morning, everyone. I know that this is our first podcast in English, but fortunately, not the last. I want to talk about a little bit of what Culture Breakfast podcast is. We created this space in order to push culture to be the overarching theme in any organization. And today we have our guest speaker, Nicole. So thanks a lot for having you here. We're really grateful because we're going to talk about a topic that is really important, which is mental health. So hi, Nicole, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
No, we're really grateful that you have the time on having this conversation. I have lots of questions to make. I hope also that we could learn a lot from you. And so yeah, I'll start the conversation, and after the conversation, Pau will ask you some quick questions. And I don't know if you could start with introducing yourself a little bit, like your background. Nicole, right now I think you're an expert in mental health right now, working at Headspace. But yeah, you could introduce yourself better.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm a marriage and family therapist, licensed in California. I actually started my career in advertising and marketing, and I did that for about 11 years before I went back to school and got my master's to become a therapist, and did community mental health, private practice for a while, and eventually found my way to, at that time, it was called Ginger. And we were a mental health platform that brought coaching, therapy, and psychiatry to various companies and health plans. And then about 2 years ago, we merged with Headspace, which was a mental health app. And we are now in the process of combining all of those services for a user and member. So super exciting time. And yeah, happy to be here and talk about whatever I can that would help.
Yeah, and I think this transition is going to be also interesting in terms of culture, right? Like how you combine two cultures together in order to be also a place where everyone feels engaged and that they feel valued. So that's something interesting that you will be going through, I guess.
Yes, for sure. We can definitely get into that.
Great. So I think that one of the questions I would start asking you is like, what do you think? I mean, what have you seen probably more that are the major causes contributing to mental health issues in organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it depends on the organization. I think that, there's a couple of things that we sort of look at when we look at, employee wellness and folks finding purpose in the work that they do. And, there's kind of three areas where I would say we would suggest you focus, which is, does an employee have the opportunity to grow? And this doesn't have to do necessarily, I mean, it could have to do with promotions and raises, but that's not really the sort of sentiment behind it. It's really about, does this individual have the opportunity to use a growth mindset? So to learn from various things in the organization, apply those, optimize, and move on, versus being sort of like what we would think of as punished or put down or something like that for making a mistake, but really thriving in an organization that promotes a growth mindset, I would say. And then the other thing is do folks have the opportunity to see what kind of impact they're making? So, when even if it's something small, to realize that, oh, that was my contribution. I made an impact, whether it was, on somebody that needed maybe a spreadsheet from me, or was it, oh, wow, I launched that campaign and now thousands of people have access to meditation, so there's various levels of impact, but as long as you can see that in your work, it tends to help you thrive more. And then the other thing is relationships. And I would say, being able to connect meaningfully with other folks in your organization, whether that's your, maybe your manager, maybe it's other folks on your team or other departments that you feel those relationships are good. You feel like connection in those. Yeah. And so just having the ability to feel all of those things and have the organization be mindful and having the organization pay attention to those things is, I think, helps contribute to the overall health of the culture and the mental health of the organization.
Wow. I've never seen it that way, because we understand usually mental health as, oh, it's burnout, or it's stress, right? Or it's overwhelming. And what I am hearing here is like that, but that's the root cause, right? Like the root cause where everything starts, it's not having opportunity to grow, connections, and opportunity to see the impact. So yeah, that's really amazing how you now that you put it that way, I think it's easier for people to understand where everything begins. But how do you, and you talk about like organization needs to be mindful about these subjects, but how could an organization notice this kind of aspects?
Yeah. And I do think that, unfortunately, burnout and poor mental health outcomes, sorry about my calendar pinging me. Those are sort of the outcomes that we want to avoid, right? And
Okay.
I think that, paying attention and really listening, having listening sessions with the employee base, sending out frequent surveys to understand how folks are doing, and then actually having a plan in place to mitigate against those things. So I think when people feel, that the organization leadership is listening, that can make a huge difference. As well as if the organization is being transparent with their plans. So I think that increases sort of like the trust, I would say, and continuing to build that culture.
Great. No, and did you also saw like a difference between like post COVID, before COVID, and the shift that the people had, like working from home and hybrid models, with the difference on working all the time in the office? Do mental health issues increase, decrease? What happened in those cases?
Yeah. So from a business standpoint, we saw a lot of more volume for mental health requests during COVID. And I think that, that was due to a lot of different factors. Isolation, loneliness were kind of those key things that we were seeing come up. And then the return to work has had, I think, some interesting outcomes where folks are sort of now pretty used to working from home, because of COVID.
Yes.
That has caused some folks to not really be paying attention and being mindful of the structure of their day. So, whereas before, when we were all, for the most part, maybe we were going to an office, maybe sometimes working from home, but mostly we were all going to an office.
Yeah.
That lack of structure has also contributed to a lack of motivation. And so I think there's going to be some really interesting things coming out in the next couple of years once we know a little bit more about that. And I think that's why we're starting to see some companies say, okay, we're going to do 2 days in the office and 3 days at home, or, some combination, because I think there's, working from home, as you probably both know, it's like, oh, there's so many benefits.
Yeah.
I don't have to drive and deal with the traffic and all that sort of stuff. But there's also benefits in having that clear-cut structure. So
yeah, like time-based, and then you go out of the office, you close the computer, and that's it, right? I mean, when you're working from home, the computer is always there, and it's like, oh, let me just check this quick email, or oh, let me just answer. So I think, yeah, it's the stress is going to come in a different kind of ways, as you mentioned, and the new information and the data would be interesting in the coming years. And have you seen also, like, in the organizations, what are like the still like the overlooked aspects that significantly influence mental health? And you mentioned these three, but I don't know if you have like also like some existing paradigms that the organization will still have and that we have to break still.
Let's see, some habits that you feel are did you say habits?
Yeah, hold on. Let me, do you hear us well now?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I could repeat the whole question, don't worry. It's fine. It's fine. So what I wanted to ask you also is like, you talk about like these three main topics, but do you think there's still like some existing paradigms that organizations still have in order to improve and implement better practices? Like, what are the overlooked aspects that you still see that organizations have?
Yeah, I think that there is still, not all, but there is still some stigma around talking about mental health in the workplace.
Yeah.
And really kind of overlooking that as part of the overall culture and how it impacts productivity and growth of an organization. So when we can kind of normalize these discussions around mental health and even bring, maybe it's a group format to an organization, we'll see people really open up, among their colleagues and share things. And that trust and vulnerability and can really kind of strengthen the team once they sort of empathize and understand each other. And then, of course, that strength translates into hopefully motivation, productivity, driving the business forward, etc.
Yeah, like, and I have like two follow-up questions here, because one of the episodes before we talk about vulnerability, right? And that, and like Brené Brown talks a lot about this, and Susan David, and it's like a topic that it's good that we're talking a lot about these topics, but organizations are like, yeah, you don't need your emotions here, you just get to work, right? But as you mentioned, like being vulnerable, it creates trust, and that's the only way then people will be open to have this conversation of how are they feeling, right? I mean, that's the end of it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with that, and I think it's when people accept, so it sort of is a group process. I think it's almost like talking about the fact that it's okay to be vulnerable here, to create that culture and make it okay, because otherwise some people are going to take that leap, and other employees will not, because it doesn't feel safe. And all of this is really sort of based in safety and fear. People not feeling safe for whatever reason, and then that sort of perpetuates the fear in the organization, and so people tend to hide just to stay safe.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we are doing one another or the organization any favors by hiding.
Yeah, because it's a shield, right? Like you put in order to be safe. And what we've seen in some organizations, and I don't know in your side, is like because that's the way they can maintain their job, right? And that's the thing, is like the organization needs to know about these topics, but if I talk out loud, I would probably lose my job, right? And even now that the market is moving so fast and there's like a lot of layoffs going on, that's the fear that a lot of people have, not only like speaking out loud, but also the risk of losing their job. So how would you mitigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very tough question. There are a lot of tough decisions being made at various companies right now, and people are really starting to go back into their shell to maintain their safety. The only thing that I think that we can do in that scenario is to create safe spaces. Now, whether that be in small groups of maybe with their manager and a team atmosphere, maybe it's smaller kind of breakout rooms like employee resource groups, to really say, we do want to hear from you. Hearing about and learning about the culture is going to help us move the business forward, even if it's things that are really tough to hear.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that probably, and I'll go back to something that you mentioned about productivity, because I think the only way sometimes that leaders can really listen is show me the numbers, right? So, and I don't know how you've been doing it, because you need to create these spaces, as you mentioned, because you need to be aware of what people is saying and care more about your culture. But it's hard for them to understand this, because it's not like, where's the number, right? So how do you align that with, this is what we need, but this is what we cost if we don't do these changes in like productivity, engagement, turnover?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the quantitative and qualitative data and really understanding these two have to match up. So if we're looking at the numbers on an employee engagement survey, and it's not matching what we're hearing on the ground, so to speak, I think we need to really kind of look closely at that, because that tells us something right there. It tells us that people are not answering those surveys truthfully, potentially.
Yeah. Just because I have to, like, okay, check that, done, whatever, right?
So I think it's both. I think you really have to your point, look at both and pay attention to both, and take them seriously.
Yeah, like I think that's one of the hard, I don't know if it's the hardest thing, but sometimes HR leaders need to be more quantitative sometimes, to try to translate what everything's happening in the organization, and show that in numbers, which will make easier for leaders which are more data driven to, okay, be convinced on making a decision, probably, right? I don't know if you've seen that also, right?
Yeah. And it's hard, because you're potentially spending money on something that's, kind of like a hypothesis in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you have like any, I don't know, if examples or testimonies that on organizations that you've seen that there's more resistance towards implementing healthier practices with teams, and what type of organization? And I think that at the beginning you mentioned it a little bit, of which organizations or what type of organizations have more resistance to change.
Excuse me. I think maybe, sometimes it may be harder for larger companies
Okay.
to implement change. Just because it requires so much communication. It's expensive. They're not really sure, what the benefits would be to their employee base. Let's see. As far as industries, I could say like there's a particular industry. Sometimes it's hard for people to implement mental health services when the employee base is not at a computer all the time.
Okay.
So we actually have a coaching service that's all on your phone. It's like a chat. The coaches are chatting with you on text. So we tried to solve and try to help the companies like solve for that, so that people can access support from wherever they are. Maybe they're like at a job site, or like we work with some airlines, and those folks, they have a hard time like keeping like a Zoom therapy appointment, but we've heard about airline employees chatting into their coach, helping them navigate, back in COVID when people were fighting on airplanes about wearing the mask, so it was like, I think it's about having enough options for the different types of employee groups. We have so many different kinds of jobs in the world. It's one company we were talking to there. It was a big financial company, but all their employees were off there was only 2 employees in each of these remote offices. So they were very kind of lonely.
Yeah.
And then there's other companies where they say we're too close together. I get so annoyed with all these people, So I think for them to really describe to us, hey, here's what, my employee base is struggling with. And then when we get in those new employees, we brief, our providers to say, hey, we're bringing in this new client. Here's what their employees are struggling with, just so you know a little bit of background on the company. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, like how does, and probably you could share a little bit more of how Ginger works on what you're doing.
Yeah, so now we're called Headspace officially.
Yeah, perfect.
We will now have the meditation, all of the Headspace amazing content that has always been in there. And if folks who have access to our services will have now all of that content, plus the availability of coaching, chatting to a coach, or seeing a licensed therapist in their, the state where they reside, or a licensed psychiatrist. Again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you kind of have all of the options in one place, I guess, is the idea.
Yeah. And I know that it's an app and everyone can have like a personal access, but when it comes, as you mentioned, like these big airlines, organizations, do you tailor the product? I mean, how does that work, and what are like the most hardest parts, I guess, on implementing the process?
We don't tailor the product because it's just one product. The app can't really change for every single one. There's like one health plan that it sends members straight to our therapist rather than going through coaching first, but that's a small thing. But when a new client comes in, we have all of their information on their employees that we load into our system. So when that employee tries to access the app, they're automatically in there. And then as a provider, they see like we call it a benefits tab. And so in the system where the providers work, they see, oh, this person works for XYZ company, like maybe Pinterest or something like that. And then it tells what benefits they have, what type of company is this, that kind of thing. So they can see a little bit of information about the company. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And I don't know if you could share, and this would be like so interesting and probably not about mental health, but like, yeah, like the transition from the cultures, right? Because I believe Ginger had one culture and Headspace had one, like values and the vision and the purpose of what you're doing. So how does that transition is looking for you? And also, yeah, what are your expectations also?
Yeah. So I think, like with any merger, there's two different, like you said, two different cultures that are coming together. And I've experienced this in other mergers too. Once folks start to get to know each other, again, using that sort of like relationship piece, and we actually start engaging in, projects together and getting to know people on a personal level, all of a sudden now it doesn't become this person is from Headspace or this person is from Ginger. this is just, oh, this is Nicole, she works in care services. And so I think it's about providing the time and space for employees to really kind of like get to know each other in that process, allow for space to have like personal conversations, because then this is just, like I said, just a person that works here, and there's no more like, oh, which company did you come from?
Yeah, where's your resume? Like, no, I hear a lot of connection. Connection is the important thing. And have you had like spaces especially for connecting, or it's only like meetings? I'm curious about like, is there like a strategy more overall of creating space for connect?
Yeah. So our CEO is actually a huge believer in the connection part, and we have once a year. We used to do it twice a year, but now once a year, everybody goes offline for like 4 hours, and we have various breakout rooms. We have presentations to learn about his vision and the company strategy. And so you do get to meet people from different departments and things like that. Of course, back pre-COVID and when before the merger and all that, we were all in person, so it was a little different. But
Yeah. So you are now fully remote, everyone?
yeah, remote optional, so that we do have 2 offices, one in Santa Monica and one in San Francisco. So you can optionally go in to the office. Yeah.
Great. And another thing that I'm curious about is like you being a company of mental health, right? And creating like best health practices in an organizations. What are the things that you do as a company, or probably you don't do it, but you use those resources? Like what? I'm curious on how like your culture or your daily traditions kind of how do they work for a mental health company?
Yeah. So we start a lot of meetings with a meditation.
Mm-hmm.
We have our all hands starts with a meditation. So everybody is sort of like grounded going into the meeting. There are optional meditations like throughout the week that you can do with one of our sort of like key kind of talent meditation teachers that we call them. And then we actually have, which I think is really cool, access to a coach that you can talk to at any time. That's a private conversation. They're externally, they don't work at our company. They're like an external company, but they're only for our employees, so they're available like all the time. And I think in it you'll see like even some of the executives will say like, oh, sorry, I can't come to this meeting, I have a coach appointment, or I have to go to my therapy appointment or something like that, so that it's just like a normalized.
Yeah, you normalize those kind of things. And I also believe, I don't know, like if your calendar is like really organized, like no meetings and one day without meetings, those kind of things, we also have them.
Yeah, we have time blocks for like they do encourage people to take time blocks for self-care, and also time blocks for get things done, so that you don't have people booking meetings in that time slot. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Like really curious about how the culture worked, and it's really cool. Like everyone starts with a meditation and have access to all those resources. And a little bit more about like what could you share to the audience? Like imagine there's probably organizations that want to improve their mental health for their employees, but probably there are not a lot of resources like for implement Headspace or something else. So what could be like practical advice you could give them in order to start improving their work environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunately it does place a lot of onus, I think, on managers. If there aren't resources available, a lot of times the managers or the HR department will become sort of like a mini therapist.
Yeah, that's true. HR is the therapist, I know.
Yeah, it's like, they're not trained therapists and they have other things to do, right? And so I think it's a lot about, encouraging a conversation that's often pretty structured. And so really thinking about it as like, what part of our work can we have like a conversation about?
Mm-hmm.
What part can I give you feedback on that's going to contribute to your growth? And then what part of your work can, as I, the manager or the HR person, recognize and give you credit for?
Mm-hmm.
So, because part of what people are showing up for work to gain is validation.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like I'm validated for, maybe it's my education, my experience, what I can contribute, and so to be recognized in that way, even if it's something small, just to know, oh, somebody noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to think about those three things and keep those in mind, as far as like, okay, we can have a conversation about the work, we can give each other feedback, two-way feedback, so that we're both kind of learning, and then we're recognizing the work that's been done, or recognizing a contribution. Just providing any kind of recognition, I think, is good.
Yeah, and I think it comes a lot on how to train managers or to coach managers on you doing these conversations. Even it would take you time, eventually will help you having a more productive team and a more engaged team. And these are the fear we believe we've seen in organizations. Is like, I want like an immediate change, right? And that's not going to happen like that. It's like you have to start, and eventually you will get there. So yeah, what could you tell to those managers?
I would say be patient with yourself and be patient with your team, and understand that the more that you're connecting with people, the stronger they're going to feel, the more motivated they're going to feel to get these, whatever it is, done, to drive towards these goals and these metrics. Because a lot of times, some of the research will say, people will work for their manager more than they will work for the brand.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
And so I say, like, okay, that's fine. Let's use that to our advantage, and let's build that relationship, make sure that people feel good about what they're doing every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah, I like how you put that. Like, be patient with yourself and be patient with the team. I love that. And now I'm gonna let Pau give you do you some quick questions, and then we'll wrap it up with something else that you would like to add, if that's great.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in this part, Nicole. My first question is not very quick, but I'm gonna do it. So, do you think it's important for the CEO to believe in these programs for mental health before they are implemented, or to have success? I don't know if you see difference between the CEOs that have the
the awareness, right?
They have the awareness in these topics, or the CEOs that doesn't have that.
I don't want to sort of speak for the CEOs. I don't know exactly. But I think when there is, coming from the top, if there tends to be comfort talking about mental health and making that a culture, it will definitely trickle down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think within the process will have more friction, obviously, right?
Cool.
I think it.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I think if it starts at the top and there's comfort around talking about that momentum can spread throughout the organization.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yes. Nicole, in your career working with mental health, what are you more aware of now that you weren't before?
Hmm. I think that it is probably around, I would say, normalizing mental health and making sure that folks have access.
Mhm.
You know, there access even in the US where, you know, they say that their access is good. I would say we're just sort of starting,
Mm.
you know, and that there's so many different areas where we can improve access so that everyone can get access, not just like employees of a company, but everybody who needs it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very important. And what would you say to organizations that are still resistant to change in this regard? We already listened a lot of tips, but I don't know if you have like 2 or 3 more things to add.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they're resistant to adding like mental health as a benefit, you know, I think it's a hard decision to make for companies because it's not free, right? But understanding that when you normalize mental health and you reduce the stigma, that your talent is going to thrive.
Mhm.
And once they feel like they're thriving and they're doing well, they're going to be more productive.
Mhm.
And so, but again, it's sort of a stretch and a leap. And I understand, you know, when companies are struggling with that decision. But
Yeah,
when you feel well, you perform well.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
and it's like the domino effect. So
Yeah, cause and effect. That's it.
yeah,
Yes, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
yeah. And okay, the next question is, do you have your favorite book or some book that you want to recommend?
Yeah, well, you had already mentioned Brene Brown earlier. So I do love her book called Dare to Lead.
Yeah, I love that too.
You know, you can listen to it on Audible or read it, and it's, you know, it does really encourage like leaning into vulnerability and leading by example with that. So
Yeah.
it's probably my favorite, I guess.
No, that's cool. Like I think it's like being open to normalize conversations and being vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are very fans of Brené Brown too. So.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, and the last one is, could you share a tip for people to start improving their mental health, not as a company, but as an individual?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, one of the things that we sort of take for granted and in terms of like our mood and our level of anxiety and that kind of thing is just really basic functions and to pay attention to, which are around eating, sleeping, and exercising. It doesn't have to be, you know, huge workout, but just 30-minute walk, being out in nature. You know, we will often make the choice to put all 3 of those things on the back burner.
That's true.
And then we wonder, why am I so in such a bad mood? Why am I not motivated to get work done? You know, why am I not motivated to do the things I normally like when we have made a choice to let go of these major things? So I really encourage people to always pay attention to the self-care that you make a choice around. And just to be really fierce with your choices, you know, to put those choices first, because you can't show up fully if you're not really taking care of yourself.
Yeah,
And you don't need to spend money in those tips that you already said.
and it starts with you. Actually, in the book of Brené Brown, it says like how you are is how would you lead, right? And I think that's also like if you're not eating well and sleeping and if you're not okay, then how would you show up for your team?
Exactly.
And it also comes to that, right? So Nicole, before that we close, do you want something else you could share, that probably something that we haven't like spoken yet or asked you about that you think is really important?
Let's see. I think it's important for organizations to just, well, not just because it's a big thing, but to continue to have the conversation around how we put mental health at the forefront of employee wellness. You know, it will help to reduce burnout. Burnout is very expensive. Attrition, replacing and backfilling is not cheap. It's not fun. It takes a ton of time. And, you know, once an employee is in and they have learned and grown within, they're so valuable. So really pay attention to how you nurture people, because you'll see that pay off. But again, it does require some patience.
Yeah, it's patience, but eventually I mean, I don't know if thanks to COVID, but we didn't believe in remote work, and now it's something that's really useful. So I think, as you mentioned, that it would be really interesting on seeing how in the next years things change, because we're starting to talk more about these subjects that we didn't talk that much about before. We didn't spoke out loud about emotions, about vulnerability, about going through therapy openly with a manager. So I think I really hope, I mean, we hope, that's why actually we created this space, is we really hope that culture is the main goal of any organization, that we mentioned that culture has to be in the strategic table of every decision, right?
100%. Yes.
Nicole, thanks a lot, honestly, for your time. We're really grateful. I learned so much from you actually in this conversation, something that I knew, but I didn't know how the deeper impact they had. So thanks for having you. I hope it's not the last time. And thanks for everything you shared. Honestly, we're really grateful about it.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, dear Nicole. And I'm a fan of Headspace. I always use the app. So yeah.
Thank you. You have a fan number one here, and eventually fan. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
Bye.